Hi, how you doing, Kyle?
I'm well. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
It's nice to talk to you too. You sound boomy and radio-y.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was trying to think. Surely you and I have done an interview before because I've done several with Chris a few years ago, and I know I've talked to Nick a few times. And I was racking my brain trying to think the last time we talked, and then it occurred to me that it's because I've listened to so many of your of like live bootlegs and albums of yours that I think I constructed an interview in my head that's never actually happened. So
Yeah, I know that feeling. There's some people you feel like you kind of know or you're spoken with because you spend so much time with them surreptitiously, you know.
that seems like a perfect lead into what we're talking about. In fact, I didn't really plan that, but that's sort of what's going on here in a bit of a different way with you and this record Bandwagonesque that you've covered in full, because a record that, as I read, your favorite album by your favorite band, right?
Yeah, you know, it is my favorite record by Teenage Fanclub, who are in fact my favorite band. I would argue it's not even their best album, but it is my favorite record of theirs. I mean, I think one has to make the distinction between, you know, the album that first brought an artist or a band into your consciousness and what that means and the weight of that sense of discovery, the wonder of kind of finding something that is in the universe that you didn't know existed, and then you fell in love with it. But then also the fact that, you know, that artist or band hopefully went on to make some albums that maybe rivaled that one or even bested it. And I believe that's the case for Teenage Fanclub. That's not obviously meant as a slight to Bandwagonesque, because I wouldn't have covered it if I didn't feel the way I did about it. But I think they've made so many great albums, and that's just one of them.
You're making me wonder what the parallel would be actually for Death Cab for Cutie, because I think I came in like a lot of people on Trans, and it's this amazing record. But is it your best record?
You know, I think it's certainly up there. I feel like people's favorite albums by Death Cab are really relate to their entry point into the band. You know, I feel like We Have the Facts is kind of the early fans' favorite album. You know. And I think that one certainly rivals Transatlanticism as the best one. But, you know, as a band that thankfully, for our sake, has had numerous entry points, be it in the early days or Transatlanticism being like an obvious breakout record for us, or, you know, Plans being this big major label record, you know, that introduced a lot of new people to the band, and so on and so forth. You know, I think that Transatlanticism, if it's not the best, it's certainly probably in the top. It's definitely in the top three, and that all really depends on, I think, where your entry point into our band is.
And while I'm trying not to make this an interview about Death Cab for Cutie, obviously, I will say that I'll go out on that ledge and say I've called Transatlanticism like maybe the best album of the 2010s decade. So that's how I feel about it anyway. So that's for personal reasons, though.
If you feel that way, that makes me I'm flattered. And if we've made anything that kind of hits that note for anyone, we're more than thrilled.
Well, let's turn the spotlight back over to this fan club record here with Bandwagonesque. I mean, you know, favorite album by your favorite band, still, you could have picked any album to cover in full at this point. You know, you're between albums with everything else, and I know the setup that happened here with being asked by the what's the company called?
Turntable Kitchen.
Right. You know, they ask you to do, and you could have picked any album. Was there more than just the favorite thing about this record that made you land on it?
You know, I think one of the many factors that made me choose Bandwagonesque was that it's, you know, the album is a fairly straightforward record in its construction. You know, I mean, it's, you know, a lot of big jangly guitars, and my attempt at covering it was in no means, you know, an indictment that there was something missing from the original album. But, you know, I think I had a couple of records in mind, and I felt like, well, you know, obviously there are some songs on that record that I want to just kind of pay tribute to exactly as they're arranged because I think they're perfect. But there were some other songs I was like, you know what, I could play around with this. I think I could do something different with it. Certainly not better, but I could do something a little bit different in the presentation. So, you know, I think it lent itself better to this approach than maybe some of the other records I was considering.
And for something that you've heard so many times, did recording the album reveal anything that you hadn't noticed before?
Oh, for sure. I think for me, I was just really astounded at the complexity of the harmonies. You know, in my attempts to recreate, a lot of them were pretty labored. You know, I kind of, foolishly and arrogantly kind of thought that the doing the vocals would be like one of the easier elements of making the record. But it's a testament to how great of arrangers they are and singers that those guys are, that they could create something that felt so simple, so effortless, but was in fact incredibly complex. And so that was what stuck out to me the most. Also, I mean, Raymond is just such a wonderful guitar player, and I'm not, and like kind of just trying to follow some of his leads and and try to kind of do my ham-fisted version of guitar solos was quite humbling as well.
Then there's that funny little song right there sandwiched into track 2 with Satan. I mean, this album's kind of full of these little moments, but you talk about being a guitar player. Have you ever rocked as hard as you had to with that little cut right there?
I've been in some punk bands in my day. It was a long time ago, but I actually, whenever they would play Satan live, they would always play it at the end of What You Do to Me, or if they did a short version of the concept, they would add Satan on the end of it. And I considered maybe doing What You Do to Me and going right into Satan as kind of a super duper nerdy fan homage, but I felt it might kind of be lost on a lot of people, so I decided to just kind of keep it as was. But
you can always do that live yourself.
Yeah, I guess I could. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little busy right now to kind of have a whole band learn this album again, but maybe if the time allows at some point, maybe I will.
You just have those little moments, and all I kept thinking about was, this was the sound of youth. An album like this really does capture a sound of youth that it's usually kind of harder to have this sort of creativity when you get older. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I think one of the things that I find so profound about the album is that, it really kind of spans a pretty wide emotional palette. I mean, you have, some songs that are, dare I say, kind of naive and juvenile, however, but naive kind of love songs like Sidewinder that are kind of just fun and light, and then there are songs like Alcoholiday that have some just really devastating lyrics in them. And Guiding Star is this beautiful song that is both innocent and very worldly at the same time. And, I can't put myself in the mindset of, those guys when they're making that album. But, I do think there's, in my own experience, there is something to be said about creating in a virtual vacuum. When I recently came across, my wife and I just moved, and I came across a stack of CDRs of Death Cab demos from 1997 and 98. I mean, these are like my early 4-track demos for some of the songs I made the first album. And as I was listening back through them, I was like, wow, this just seems effortless in a way that I don't, I struggle a little more in my middle age to kind of achieve the same level of effortlessness, and I don't think that's because, I've written my last song or anything like that, but I think that one's creativity is really, it's really wide open when you're that young, because you don't really think that anybody's paying attention, and you don't expect anybody to pay attention. So you're just kind of making it really for yourself without any other indications. And as much as I still try to take that approach, there are certainly pressures that exist upon me, that didn't exist, on my shoulders at that point. So, I would much rather be in the situation I'm in now than not, of course. But, I think when you listen back to those, early records by any band, I think you can really hear that.
I know there's that whole thing about, sometimes you have to look back to go forward. And I do this constant argument with myself about trying not to fall into the nostalgic hole. But, when you're talking about it sometimes like this, and of course I lose all the time to that argument, by the way, but it seems like you can use that to kind of to find whatever that next step is for you. I'd be curious if this does end up influencing you in any sort of way in your next soon endeavors.
Oh, it absolutely already has. I mean, I think that, one of the most difficult things for, I should say that, the delicate balance that, all artists, especially musicians, need to strike as they make records into their 30s and 40s and beyond, is to maintain a self-awareness about what they're good at, which tends to also be fairly, very closely related to what people like about their music, but also continue to push forward and bring in new elements. And I think for me, one of the bands that's done that incredibly well has been Low. I mean, if you look at Low's catalog, starting from I Could Live in Hope all the way through, their most recent album, there are, as with any band that's been making records for, 25 years almost, there are some miscues here and there, but, overall, they are constantly bringing in they're changing just enough to keep things interesting, but also always staying true to, an aesthetic that has made them so beloved.
Well, I can throw that at you as well. I've always been so impressed that you guys have done that. I loved Kintsugi. And as far as the Teenage Fanclub, I love their most recent record so much too. And Norman Blake doing the, I'm in Love, just one of the best little simple songs that's came out, in the past few years. Just incredible that he still got that knack. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think, as I think of any of my favorite bands who've been making records for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, I can't speak to what their goals are with every album, but I know for us, I'd like to think of every album that we make as hopefully adding a handful of tracks to like our mental or, our like literal kind of greatest hits playlist. Like that you want to kind of make sure that every album has, you want every record to have 10 to 12 like amazing songs that are the best things ever written ever, of course, right? That's always the goal. But, I think in reality, I think that at the end of the day, if, 9 albums in, if we can make a record that, over the course of a 25 song set, we can play 4 or 5 tunes from and have people get excited about them the same way they get excited about some of the older tunes and, the albums of resounding success. And, that was something that, I think, we certainly felt with Kintsugi, and obviously hoping that continues with the next record.
Well, you're batting 1,000 at this point, so I expect nothing less.
Well, I don't know if you may not have conferred with the internet on that one, but I appreciate you saying it.
Ben, it's really a pleasure to talk to you and finally do this interview that I thought had already done so many times before. So.
Well, it's been nice. It's been nice finally talking to you, and I'm sure our paths will cross very soon.
I hope so. Look forward to the next record, and I'll have fun with this one in the meantime. Thanks for talking, and take care, Ben.
Of course. Take care. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.